Our next session, folks, is entitled, What's in Storage for California's Water Future? We would like to thank the Drier Engineering Corporation for being a sponsor of this segment. Thank you, Mark, and the entire Drier team. Please give them a round of applause. We appreciate it. Water storage is critical to California's water supplies, hydropower, and sustaining wildlife and habitat. Erratic weather conditions and the timing and intensity of rainfall have made the capture and storage of water more challenging. The debate continues as to whether there is a need to build new and extensive reservoirs, or if modifying operations of existing surface reservoirs and groundwater basins and mandating more water conservation are enough to meet California's future water demands. Today we have three remarkable speakers who are faced with these questions every single day. As with the previous sessions, each of these speakers will present, and then we will have an opportunity to ask them questions at the end. Their bios are available in the program. Joining us today are Bill Hasencamp, who is manager of Colorado River Resources for the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. We also have Eric Averett, general manager of Rosedale Rio Bravo Water Storage District. And lastly, we'll hear from Jim Watson, who is general manager of the Sites Project Authority. Please welcome these gentlemen. Come on up, guys. And Bill, we're going to start with you.
Thank you, Fritz. It's good to be at Disneyland. I haven't been here in 30 years. It's a little different than I remember. For example, I had to walk through a metal detector to get my coffee this morning. And the Starbucks that I went to was so big, it seemed like I had been transformed by Star Wars into another planet where all they drank was coffee, and that was the only Starbucks in town. But it's good to be part of an organization that has helped provide the water that has let Disneyland grow to where it is today. I'm going to talk about storage on the Colorado River, far from California, but very critical to California, and how that role of storage has changed over the last couple of decades. As a reminder, Southern California gets its imported water supply from three major sources: the Los Angeles Aqueduct, the Colorado River Aqueduct, and the State Water Project. All of those supplies have been cut back, and today the base average allocation supply of each of those systems is about half of the contractual amount and build-out amount. So we have to live with less water coming into our system, and we've done that by increasing our local resources, increasing our conservation. But what makes the Colorado River unique is that in dry years, when we need the water the most, that's the only aqueduct that we can fill it up and meet the dry year needs of our region. Now, the Colorado River flows through 7 states and 2 countries before it reaches the ocean, although it actually doesn't reach the ocean. It's dammed and used by the 7 states and 2 countries. And whenever we negotiate agreement on the Colorado River, the 7 states are involved, 2 countries, the NGO groups, the Indian tribes. But somehow we're able to reach consensus more often, it seems, than we are within the state of California managing our own water supplies. Storage on the Colorado River has long been known as a critical need. Around the turn of the last century, farmers in the Imperial Valley found a great place to grow crops, a place that had abundant supply of water from the Colorado River, and it almost never rained, 2 inches of rain a year or less, so it was perfect for growing crops. But there was one problem, and that was that the Colorado River was untamed. And in 1906, after trying to keep the Colorado River within its banks, it overflowed the channel and flowed uncontrollably through the Imperial Valley, carving a wide swath of damage as it flowed into the formerly dry Salton Sink. Major flooding occurred, and in 1906, the Salton Sea was born because of this flood. It took them 18 months to get the Colorado River back in its channel and back in the river going into the Gulf of California. But it was clear that storage was needed on the Colorado River to tame the mighty Colorado. It was about this same time that William Mulholland was looking for a new supply for Southern California and from the Colorado River as well. And it was known that a dam was needed to control the river if we were going to get any kind of reliable supply from it. But to get a dam built, the perfect site chosen was Black Canyon Dam near present-day Las Vegas. To get a dam built, we needed congressional approval, which meant all the 7 states had to be on board. So the 7 states got together in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 1922 and reached agreement on how the water would be allocated among each of the basins and later each of the states so that California wouldn't get a leg up because it needed the water before the other states were growing. Once that agreement in place, that paved the way for the construction of Hoover Dam, which was completed in the 1930s, and Hoover Dam today. Now, if you ever get a chance to go to Hoover Dam today, I would highly recommend walking across that bridge. You can walk across that bridge, look straight down at the Colorado River and Hoover Dam, nearly 1,000 feet below you. It's quite a remarkable view. Hoover Dam is also so important to power generation. Most of the power comes here to Southern California. It fuels all of the power needed to move water from the Colorado River here into Southern California. Interestingly, the city of Los Angeles is now looking at a new proposal to build a pump-back storage at Hoover Dam to further increase the power benefits of the reservoir. We'll see if that happens. Behind Hoover Dam is Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the country. Here was the heyday of Hoover Dam, 1983. It's spilling 26.2 million acre feet. If my math is right, that's about 500 years worth of water supply for the city of Anaheim. But we don't stop there. Just a little bit more upstream is the second largest reservoir in the United States, Lake Powell. And further up, there's even some other small reservoirs. Flaming Gorge Reservoir, we don't talk much about. It's 3.8 million acre feet. It's bigger than the largest reservoir in the State Water Project, bigger than Lake Oroville. And Lake Mojave and Lake Navajo barely get a mention, yet they're both more than double the size of Diamond Valley Lake. So storage the Colorado River is all about storage. But the storage also measures the health of the river. And Lake Mead is not the happiest place on earth. It's been going down for the last 20 years. And when Lake Mead, the largest reservoir, goes down, that makes big news. National news, New York Times, about the largest reservoir in the United States reaching critically low levels. And there was talk about, well, this is a record drought. The drought must be so bad on the Colorado River that's causing this to go down. But I like what Fritz said earlier. He said, well, we've had some wet years, and maybe the drought is easing or ending. We haven't made up for all the past years. But even the federal government agrees that right now the United States is in a 20-year low for drought coverage. They put this report out just last week, and the drought monitor in the west shows there's no red areas, which are drought, and only a few slightly dry areas, but not in the water-producing areas of the Colorado River or the State Water Project. So what is causing Lake Mead to go down then if it's not drought? Well, back in 1922, they didn't have the full suite of data. They only had a small sample, and they thought the runoff of the river was 18 million acre feet. And that's what they allocated to the states and later to Mexico. But we know now with a much longer record, there's a lot less water in the river than we thought. And so when demands start to increase and exceed the average supply, well, Fritz said it would be like this. It's clear that Lake Mead is different than other reservoirs in California. Reservoirs in California store water in wet seasons and deliver them in dry seasons. Or they store water in wet years for delivery in dry years. Lake Mead stored water from low demands of the last century for use in this century. And it's a finite supply. Lake Mead is almost like a groundwater overdraft where it's going down and it's not going to refill. People say, when will Lake Mead refill? When will the drought end? It won't unless we get people to leave the Southwest United States. But with crisis comes opportunity. The Colorado River was divided among the 7 states. Each state had a certain allocation. To look at the lower basin allocations, to have the relative size, California is like a big swimming pool. It's got the largest in the lower basin. And then Arizona, a little smaller, a pop-up pool. And well, Nevada, pretty small. No one thought that Nevada was going to need a lot of water, that they would live in that area back in the 1930s. But the deliveries of water were much different. Even though California had the largest share, we were taking even more because the other states weren't using it. That was the bargain. And for 5 decades, we took extra water, but we had to cut back our use. And so I can see that clock is there, so I have to skip a little faster, pick up the pace, because that sound is coming, I know it. But we partnered with our ag partners to reduce use because the brunt of the cutback that we occurred in 2003 fell on Metropolitan. So San Diego County and Met funded conservation within Imperial Irrigation District. The state of California lined the All-American Canal, which lost about 100,000 acre feet a year. And we paid farmers in the Palo Verde Valley more money to not grow crops than they were making by growing crops. And those conserved water was sent to Southern California, but it wasn't enough. We realized we needed more. The problem with transfers that are fairly static is that in wet years, we don't need that much water, and in dry years, it's not enough. We needed some kind of storage mechanism in Lake Mead. But the rules in Lake Mead at the time said, use it or lose it. Whatever you don't divert, you can't carry over to the next year. So we started negotiations with the other states to change that. And at the same time, there were no shortage rules for the Colorado River. So the states were confused about how the river would operate. And in 2005, Secretary Norton provided a sense of urgency that says, you develop a shortage plan, or I will, and you won't like the one I develop. So the states, 7 states got together, developed this plan, and it said how shortages would be devised. And Secretary of the Interior Kempthorne signed that in 2007. But the key to us was, for the first time, it gave us storage rights in Lake Mead. And with those storage rights, we were able then to take water from Northern California in wet years, move it into our service area, back up on our Colorado, and back Colorado River water into Lake Mead. So we were able to add storage to California through Lake Mead's unused capacity. Going into the drought of the historic drought a few years ago, we had 580,000 acre feet of water that was available to us, that we used 500,000 acre feet to meet demands here in Southern California. Now, thanks to these wet years, we're refilling our account, and we're going to have, by the end of this year, close to 1 million acre feet of water in Lake Mead. And with that, we're able to ramp up and down the Colorado River aqueduct deliveries. Rather than a base flow, we're able to peak in the dry years when fritzes tighten up the rain and only gives us spritzes of rain. We can move water in the Colorado River aqueduct, and years like this back off. And why it's so important, during the height of the drought, water, if you could find it, was $1,000 or more an acre foot in the Central Valley, small bits of water. In 2017, water was available on the State Water Project for $18 an acre foot, and we didn't buy it. So storage here can turn water that's worth $18 an acre foot or less into $1,000 an acre foot water in a drought. So it's huge, the value of us being able to ramp up and down these deliveries and not have to go to Northern California to compete in a drought is a huge benefit to Southern California. But there's one catch that still remained that we didn't resolve in 2007. 2 things we learned in the last couple of years. One is that new climate science suggests that the Colorado River is more at risk than we thought, and we needed to do more to help prevent it from crashing. And 2, the state of Arizona took the position that this storage that you've been doing is great, but if we're ever in a shortage, you can't participate in storage, and you're cut off. So we've been discussing this drought contingency plan for years. Progress was slow, and in 2018 in Las Vegas, Commissioner Berman, Commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, took a page from the prior Secretary of the Interior and issued an ultimatum and said, approve this drought plan by January 31st, or I will do it. and you're not going to like what I do. So we got together and said bazinga, and boom, we met. We didn't quite meet the January 31st deadline, but she extended it until March, and we met the deadline. And I slipped up and didn't include a slide of the historic signing of the DCP in Lake Mead last week. It's on my phone, if you can see it in the back. There's the sign, all 7 states. And the interior signed it. But it was a historic day, May 20th. And the drought plan did 2 things. One is it said each state has a role in keeping Lake Mead from crashing. So California, Nevada, and Arizona would all pitch in and leave water in Lake Mead to prevent if we go back into drought and it starts to crash. But more importantly, it incentivized more storage in Lake Mead, but this time long-term storage. It said Arizona, instead of taking water and storing it in the ground where it does no benefit, why don't you store it in Lake Mead and prop up the elevation of Lake Mead? Nevada, why don't you do that? Metropolitan, we'll give you more access to storage. We'll give storage to the upper basin states of Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, Colorado, all to help prop up the reservoirs. And while the water's in storage, it provides a common benefit to everybody else. So if Arizona's water stays in storage for a decade, that's going to help all other users that might need that extra water next time we have a California drought. And likewise, when we do conservation here in Orange County, and we can back off water and leave it in Lake Mead, water users in Arizona benefit. So this, and I can see that next, it's about 10 seconds till the next beep comes up, so I'll have to summarize before it comes up, but the plan is working well, but it's only through 2026. We have our bigger work to do to develop what are we going to do after that time. Thank you.
That was excellent. Well done, Bill. That was awesome. Next, we'll hear from Eric.
Well, good morning. I appreciated the picture of the toilet in Nevada. Every time I go there and sit at the table, I hear the flushing noise as my money leaves my wallet. The topic today is what's in storage for California's water future, and it's an appropriate topic. I recognize my role here is to talk a little bit about the groundwater storage component. And to do that, I think it's important to acknowledge that groundwater storage in California is dependent on a reliable surface water supply. And so I've got 2 graphs up on the slide. On the left-hand side, it represents imported supplies from the California aqueduct, which I'm from Kern County, and we're very, very dependent on that imported supply. And you can see a downward trend due to regulatory restrictions. And Bill had mentioned that we've lost 50% of the supply. And ultimately what has happened is that within Kern County and much of the Central Valley, those demands have shifted to the groundwater basin. And that prompted the state of California to intervene to protect the resource. And they adopted or they implemented what was called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Now, when the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, was adopted, I first thought, well, we're the architect of our own problem, that somehow within the Central Valley we expanded our agricultural footprint and we've exploited the resource and we deserve to be corrected. But what I did is I actually looked at DWR's 1982 Bulletin 118, and it said, and I quote, that to the extent that the State Water Project can deliver 100% contract to the Central Valley, overdraft will be eliminated. And so what happened, or what has happened, as the State Water Project has declined in reliability, the agricultural community has shifted to the groundwater resource. There's not 1 acre of additional land developed in Kern County than there was in 1982 when Bulletin 118 came out. And so what has happened is the overdraft, at least, and I can only speak to the Kern County region, the overdraft that we've experienced is exactly proportional to the reductions in State Water Project. But putting that to the side, SGMA requires us to manage our groundwater basin. Now, the effect of obviously reduced supply is an increased reliance on groundwater. And so when we talk about storage, depending on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, we've either have very little left in storage for California's water future, or we've created an opportunity to put more water into storage by vacating the groundwater basin and creating this new reservoir that we're happy and waiting for people to help us fill. So what exactly is SGMA? So SGMA, in essence, is balancing of our water supplies. It requires the formation of what's called groundwater sustainability agencies. Those are local agencies that are willing to step forward and take responsibility to manage the groundwater within their respective service areas. It requires the development of a groundwater sustainability plan, and I want you to think of the plan as a budget. It's the document that describes how we're going to manage groundwater sustainably, and specifically how we're going to balance supplies and demands. Most of the GSAs that stepped forward throughout the state were local water agencies that never before had regulatory authority and frankly didn't want it. And so this is a new role for many of us. It was an important consideration that SGMA did not adjust the water rights structure within California. It did layer on a new requirement that you manage groundwater, but a lot of people, when SGMA was adopted, thought, well, somehow it's going to affect their water rights, and it doesn't. And I'll touch a little bit more on that in a subsequent slide. But ultimately, the essence of the act is that you manage the basin sustainably, and you do so to avoid undesirable results. And we've defined what those undesirable results are, and there's 6 of them. Now, I would contend that of the 6, really only one is necessary to manage. The others are just symptoms of the first one, and that is chronic lowering of groundwater levels. Now, that clearly is caused because you're using more groundwater than is available to be naturally replenished. All of the others are symptoms of that very first one. And so as a GSA and as a manager, I'm trying to figure out, well, what exactly is it that I have to manage, and it's supply and demand. Ultimately, the 2 knobs that you see on the screen are what the GSPs will be doing. They will be either developing additional water supplies in order to bring the supply back up to match the demand, or they will be adjusting the demand down in order to match the availability of the supply that's there. A significant challenge for most of the Central Valley. So one of the things that I've wrestled with for quite a while is this concept of perception is reality. As I've gone forth for the last 5 years almost and talked about groundwater, especially to the constituents within Kern County, there's a fundamental lack of understanding of what groundwater is. And in essence, it's very simply the supply that's available that's unappropriated by others and is naturally flowing into the basin. And it's actually a very, very small amount for most of the Central Valley. In fact, within Kern County, if you were to allocate the native yield, or we often refer to it as the safe yield, you're going to end up with about 0.3 acre-feet per acre. That's not enough to really develop overlying uses. It's not enough for really an urban or agricultural footprint. Most of the areas within Kern County have developed to a demand of about 3 acre-feet per acre. So what exactly is groundwater, and how do we allocate it, and what are the rights structures? And as I've gone forth and talked with different people, I've heard, well, I've been here since the 1890s and I've been pumping since the 1920s, and so I should get the first cut. I should get the largest share. I've heard others say, well, they've never developed their property, so therefore they shouldn't get any and I should get their share. And it's a very, very contentious issue. And we're thrust into the role of trying to figure out how do we exactly allocate this resource that's finite and deal with the potential economic consequences of cutting people back. So I want to emphasize, and the picture of the fly in the cannon is to illustrate when you're using 3 acre-feet per acre and you're allocating 0.3, it's like trying to hit a fly with a cannonball. We're focused on the wrong part of the discussion. It's really, and this is my charge as a water manager, it's focusing on the surface water supply that really has been supporting the development and trying to restore that reliability. So my part in this was to talk about the challenges and opportunities of SGMA. And my family suffers through me watching TED Talks and forcing them to watch them with me. And there was one that I'll share because I really do believe that every challenge is an opportunity. And there's this one that's really well done, and the gentleman calls it the growth rings. And he says, to the extent that there's no change or modification, we become stagnant and there's really no growth. On the other extreme end, there's chaos, and you really can't be productive or valuable in the chaos extreme. But what we want is complexity, this concept that when you're moved out of what's comfortable, then you have an opportunity to grow. So every time we have a challenge, for the most part, we rise to the opportunity and we address the challenge, whether it's through surface water storage projects, groundwater storage projects, or developing reasonable regulations to govern. So the three challenges that we have in our basin are, first, coordination. The concept that I'm a winner and you're a loser. Now, in the Kern Basin, my district is one of three that is balanced. And that's an important thing because that means that I don't have a lot of demand reduction to do. But the mindset that, well, it's your problem, really won't work. The other challenge is demand reduction. 25% of the irrigated agriculture in Kern County, to the tune of $4.2 billion per year of lost economic output, absent new supply, is the economic consequence. So how does that become an opportunity? And I'll talk a little bit about that. Finally, competition for a limited resource. The idea that we have a problem needs to go away. It really is a basin problem. There's about 22 GSAs within Kern County. SGMA gives us an opportunity to develop, for the first time in a long time, regional projects. Jim's going to touch on the idea of Sites Reservoir, which has participants throughout the state. That's a regional project. We're looking for regional solutions. Rosedale and Irvine Ranch Water Storage District have developed a Kern Fan project, which is a groundwater storage project. Again, looking at this in a larger sense and looking at it at a regional perspective is an opportunity to address some of California's water challenges. The typical SGMA mindset is up above. We've got economic productivity and beautiful homes with lots of green grass. And people's mind of SGMA is, well, that means that I'm going to fallow my field and I'm going to lose my home. And I'm being serious when I say that that is the perspective, that SGMA is going to economically devastate the region. But we have to look at it from the opportunistic standpoint. And so while we do enjoy this, it doesn't mean that it has to go away. It means that maybe some of that field can be converted to alternative energy. And maybe that home can use xeriscape or low water use landscaping. And even better, can we convert some of those agricultural fields to groundwater recharge projects that allow us to augment the supplies and offset some of that that's been reduced? So my job is to look at win-win tools when I prepare a GSP, aggregated demand reduction. So instead of fallowing 40 acres on this parcel and 40 acres on this parcel, can I collectively and regionally look at opportunities to take all that demand, reduce it, but then use those grounds or those lands in order to implement conservation easements, alternative energy projects, habitat restoration, all types of opportunities become available. Water markets are something that's been used in other states and in other countries, and we're looking at them seriously to find the true economic value of water, and we're starting to see some of that within Kern County. Water quality, for the first time, SGMA requires us to address water quality proactively, which means that instead of dealing with a regulatory constituent that's exceeded an MCL, we now have to look and evaluate, as we manage the groundwater basin, are there things or actions that we can do to protect and preserve water quality, both for urban as well as agricultural users. Preservation of water levels, and the next slide kind of illustrates how important that can be. This is a water level graph within Rosedale. The time period's pretty long, but the message is that if you're a landowner in Rosedale, you pay my water district $50 per year per acre to provide a water supply. We have done that. This graph actually should be rising because we're in surplus within my district, but we're in an overdrafted basin, and the economic consequences of that are to the tune of $1.4 million per year in energy costs just within my district. And so what that means is every landowner in my district pays $36 per acre because of additional energy costs and $50 per acre to the district to provide a water supply. So the last few slides, I want to talk a little bit about this concept of the tragedy of the commons. It's an economic term that's used to describe when people reasonably use a resource, but collectively that use exceeds the ability of the resource, and it gets to the point where you lose access to the resource completely. And so that graphic that I just showed with a water level decline is a perfect example of the tragedy of the commons, where people reasonably using the water supply to offset demand or supply reductions have pumped it to the point where literally it can drop to where we can no longer economically afford to lift it out of the ground. SGMA is intended to address that. So when you look at the greatest challenge of SGMA, it's the consequence of that 25% irrigated reduction and the $4.2 billion of economic output lost. But ultimately, if we did not balance that budget, we would be looking at significantly greater challenges. I want to do a quick comparison. Jim hates it when I do this. We've tag teamed this message a couple times, but I think it is important to acknowledge that groundwater, along with surface water storage projects, are an important part of California's water supply future. This is my district. It's 1,600 acres of dedicated recharge ground. It's farmed periodically in the off-season when we're not recharging, compared to a local reservoir. And so 1,600 acres versus a footprint of 11,000 acres. My district in 2017 brought in 400,000 acre-feet of water and stored it in the groundwater basin. That's the equivalent of the entire Isabella Reservoir volume. That's in the ground, ready to go. We have no evaporation losses. We have no significant permitting hurdles or issues. And so collectively within Kern County, we can store on an annual basis 2 million acre-feet. Now, it doesn't rise to the level of some of the reservoirs that Bill has identified, but it's a small area, and I think it represents a unique opportunity to store water for California's future. Not just for Kern County, but I have water partnerships with water districts throughout the state, and I had mentioned Irvine Ranch as one of them. My final thought is SGMA is a very necessary and important regulation, although it's a difficult one to deal with and it represents some significant challenges. It is doable. However, having said that, I think California needs to look at what is its water future. And I know you've probably heard other people say this, but I'll repeat it. Our last major infrastructure project that was publicly funded, i.e. the California Aqueduct or the Fry and Kern, was over 50 years ago when our population was half of what it is today. We need to be very serious about investing in new storage projects and new conveyance projects to capture the water when it's available and where it's available, and we need to stop pushing the water back and forth between the three competing interests. We need to recognize and acknowledge all of them. And those three interests are ag, urban, and environment, and each of them need a piece of the pie. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eric. Jim?
I'm going to try a little different to hopefully avoid the soft kitty. So I do appreciate the opportunity to provide an overview of the SITES project and the role that SITES can play in helping improve the state's water system in a sensible, sustainable, and environmentally beneficial manner. Water industry, we're challenged with the ability to continue to provide clean and affordable water that also protects the environment, especially in those drier years when there's not enough to go around. And climate change is going to make it even more difficult. So let the debate may continue on whether new storage should be performed or we continue to look at reoperating our reservoirs or conservation. We do need an all of the above solution or approach. But the storage really needs to be innovative and new partnerships if it's going to succeed. And that is exactly what the SITES Project Authority is doing. So the reliability of the state system has gone down, at least the state water project, by over 30%, in part due to age, but the other by environmental restrictions. At the state level, in response, voters approved Prop 1, which created an all of the above solution. The chapter on the water storage investment program allows the state to invest in up to 50% of a project for environmental benefits. Not water supply, just environmental benefits. But it created a dilemma for the public resource agencies because they eventually have to contract for those benefits, which is in addition to their regulatory responsibilities. On the federal level, Congress has allowed Reclamation and Interior to participate in local projects up to 25%. So all told, we could put 75% of a project to create environmental benefits. And if we improve the environment, that would improve the ability to export water through the state system that goes through the Delta. But despite the need for new storage in the system, the question remains, is there a commitment with the state and the federal to fund environmental benefits? SITES Reservoir, because of its size and scale, will be able to integrate into the state system, the backbone of which is to take the water that's produced in the Sacramento Valley and get it down to the Delta and point south. We're strategically located where we can conserve the water that comes in the wintertime from those atmospheric rivers to put it to use later in time and through exchanges with other reservoirs at other locations. Being off stream, we don't block fish migration, and we're not prone to spill when the winter storms occur. So in terms of project being unique, it's really our multiple benefits. In addition to recreation, flood control, hydropower, the biggest benefit is water supply for people and nature. In a drought or dry year, we can produce 700,000 acre feet. On a long-term average, over 500,000. Currently today, the local water agencies are looking at over 200,000 acre feet to improve their reliability. 50,000 is approximately the state investment under Prop 1 for the environment, and Interior, about 100,000 for additional environmental benefits. This multi-benefit approach is one of the key principles in the governor's executive order. How will it work? It's going to be, again, conserving those surplus flows that occur in the wintertime, release them later in time, and through exchanges with existing reservoirs at Shasta, Oroville, and Folsom to get the water where it's needed to be put to use for the most benefit. We're also using essentially beneficiary pays principle, which means the cost to produce the water will be equally shared by all users, whether it's water or for the environment, which means every investor will have a proportionate share of the benefits as well as the costs. This water for the drier periods with 15% additional storage in the Sacramento Valley really improves the resiliency of the state system. But I'd like to focus on the environmental benefits. We're really excited about this concept. It was created by the Public Policy Institute of California, an independent think tank. And after the last drought, they looked at lessons learned, what happened. And they basically said, we need to create an environmental water budget, something that can be adaptively managed during droughts to improve the environment. And that is the concept that we have taken. And in addition to that concept, it does create an interesting role for the environmental community. Somebody has to be the watchdog. Somebody has to make sure that that public investment in an asset is accurately managed and to produce environmental benefits. So that 700,000 is mostly in the water supply. It's equivalent to a new Diamond Valley or a Folsom Lake being available in a dry year. In the next drought, agriculture could get some allocation. In the last drought, they had 2 back-to-back years. Urban areas could receive more than just the minimum health and safety water that they were provided from the last drought. And in terms of resilience, we've analyzed this project both for our environmental as well as Proposition 1, 2 completely different sets of assumptions. We're not dependent on the snowpack. And what we find is as the effects of climate change become worse, the ability to divert and put into storage actually increases. So sites is exactly resilient, which is again another priority in the governor's executive order. In terms of, Fritz mentioned 600,000 acre feet. With conditions today, that number is over 1.5 million acre feet could have been put into storage. That really moves the needle. If no other project really has that scale and capacity. But what's unique about the project is this project will create the co-equal goals, and it's the unprecedented collaboration we have with our stakeholders. So in terms of our environmental benefits, state's looking at water for smelt, water for birds on the Pacific Flyway. The feds are looking at water for salmon and steelhead. We keep finding additional benefits. But we also then look at the benefits to this project from a local economic perspective. The local area has been suffering. Most of the rural communities in the Sacramento Valley have been suffering. This will create over 500 jobs per year of construction. We have 7 years of construction. Then 60 jobs every year for the full life of the project. This scale of jobs is why labor and key business groups support this project. In terms of flooding, 2017 and 2019 we had significant flooding. Closed I-5, flooded the town of Maxwell. More importantly, reduced the agricultural production in the area, which affected local jobs. So who is the authority? We're 29 local agencies located within the Sacramento Valley. We're water agencies and communities. We're ag and urban. We're big and small water agencies, north and south of Delta. Our board is made up of 17 water agencies, and for those that wanted a water supply benefit, we created what we called the Reservoir Committee. We have 21 agencies that represent the Sacramento Valley, the Bay Area, the San Joaquin, and Southern California. Some of those are looking to use this water and help with them manage through their SGMA. So it's that collaboration that we have, which is again another principle in the governor's executive order. So what makes sites different is all the things listed, but it's really important is the partnerships that we're going to forge. It starts with the operators of the state federal system. How we exchange that water between those reservoirs will be key to getting the water where it can produce the most value, whether it's for water supply or for the environment. It's going to be with the Water Commission to make sure they fund their share of an investment, and similarly with Interior, an investment for water for the environment. It's going to be working with the public resource agencies to make sure that they manage that water to produce results. It's the environmental community to make sure that that public investment in an asset does produce results. It's with the communities to support the project locally. We need to be a neighbor as part of their community. And then it's with the banks to make sure we can get low interest loans to improve affordability, and business and labor for cost-effective and accelerated deliveries. In terms of the facts of the project, we've had a lot of accomplishments in the last 3 years. We've gotten from Prop 1, $816 million, largest of any of the projects. Through U.S. Department of Agriculture, $449 million in low-interest loan, the largest loan they've ever made to any particular project. Feds, through the Interior, are looking at increasing to 25% project participation, but most importantly, the local water agencies, those 29 agencies, have raised over $27 million to move this project. It's that local sponsorship that's driving this project forward. That's what's making the difference. So when we look at the broad support, it's because of the project's fundamentals. We started with the water industry, then broadened out to business and labor, and working with the local communities. And you saw Mary Wells, she is actually a board member on our project. And now we're working with the environmental community to get them to understand their role in this project. That's resulted in significant bipartisan support at both the state and federal level. So in terms of this site's project, it's really the innovation and partnerships that is going to allow us to increase the state's water system for people and nature. In terms of the governor's recent executive order, it is an all-of-the-above approach. And the governor's 3 priorities, the sites project aligns very well with. We provide the multiple benefits. With local and federal investment, we leverage state resources. And with the authority, our partners, and our stakeholders, we're breaking down the binaries. They're working on this project, the common interest in finding long-term durable solutions. So I really want to thank you for the opportunity to provide this overview and on how we can improve the system for both people and nature. Thank you.
Thank you so much, gents. All 3 really fascinating presentations. And I'm going to throw out the first question to all of you. If you speak to environmentalists, they seem to think that conservation will be the one way we can solve all of our problems. So any of the 3 of you can respond to that.
Yeah, so conservation is huge. And we're proud of the efforts that Southern California has done to conserve water. Our imported water demands are at a record low this year. We far below the level that we had anticipated a few years ago. And we're staying at this low level even after the drought regulations have gone. However, while conservation is key, if we don't solve the problems of the Colorado River and the Bay Delta, we won't have any water to conserve. Those supplies have already been cut back by half. They could be cut back by half again. So what we're trying to do is protect what we have, not take more water from those sources, to protect what we have, and then you continue to increase conservation as more people, unfortunately, move to Southern California.
Gotcha. Jim, there's a phase of the argument that if we build more reservoirs, in drought years they will sit empty, so it's sort of it's a shallow expense. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I guess my 35 years in water, I've never seen a dry reservoir. I've seen it close due to droughts. But in terms of my response, this last drought was not the worst one on record. And yet we still had zero allocation for a considerable section of agriculture. Only health and safety water was delivered to the urban areas. And fish populations, especially winter run salmon, declined. And yet we're seeing the demand increase both for people and for nature. And the system has become hardened. We've been doing conservation, so those easy tools to use, the toilet in the tank that was done in the 70s for a drought, that's no longer available. Farmers have converted from crops to trees, making it less water available to manage through the drought. And then we have climate change that's going to create more frequent and intense storms. And I know groundwater has the capacity, but it's not in the location where the water's produced. And it's limited on how fast you can get that water into the ground. So when I look at those items, we need storage to get that capacity to move it in and be part of the all of the above approach.
Well, thank you so much. Bill, the new governor is the one tunnel guy. And the Department of Water Resources has announced it's withdrawing from the whole bidding process. So, and the Met Board still is adherent to the two-tunnel process. So where does everybody go from here?
Well, I think you summarized it well in your introduction video, laying out the challenges. We're pleased that the new governor supports a Delta fix. The details still have to be worked out. We still need to figure out sizing and permitting process. And the other piece with a tunnel to make it really work is we also have to make sure we have adequate storage, because there'll be big gulps of water available with the tunnel that we have to store. And while we've developed storage, we can lose it as pollution affects some of our storage, or some of our storage agreements expire. So we need to also focus on storage and focus on getting water fix done together.
Great. How about some questions from the audience? Anybody? If you could turn up the house lights a tad and then wait for a microphone, we'll have a couple minutes. Anybody? No? So last year, I'll give you a chance to formulate your thoughts. Last year, part of the discussion was, and we were still in the midst of a drought, that their water rights became more political and more heated in the Pacific Northwest. As we got farther into drought, more people were claiming ancient water rights. Where does that all sit now? Have we seen any changes over the last year since we've had a pretty good rainfall year? Any thoughts on that, James?
So water rights are kind of the third rail. And I can say that, and this may surprise a lot of folks, when we were in the height of the drought, I really had kind of hoped we'd have a couple more years, because I know that's kind of not the politically correct thing to say, because for California to truly address the water supply situation, you have to look at the water rights structure. And there's been a number of papers that have come out where they've identified some major water systems where when you add up all the water rights, they're 3 times the yield. It's kind of like a little bit like the California example or the Colorado example, where we claim more than actually is there. And as a consequence, it ends up in significant litigation and overuse of the resource. And so the reason I wanted the drought to continue is it would have forced the state to really weigh in and look at some of the issues on water rights. Specifically, they're restructuring water rights now by virtue of regulatory edict. And so the limitations in the State Water Project is because the environment is challenging some of the assumptions that have been made with respect to water rights. And so I think there does need to be a reevaluation of the water rights structure for California to be successful.
Well, how about a round of applause for 3 great presentations, folks? Jim, Eric, and Bill. We appreciate it so much.